Yeah, we're gonna talk a little bit about coffee here, but thanks for joining us. Tell us where you're from, where you're calling from right now.
So I'm currently in my hometown in England. So
Okay.
originally I come from Southeast England, and I'm just getting prepped at the moment to go away to Guatemala tomorrow.
Okay. Okay. And what are you going to do in Guatemala?
So with Perfect Daily Grind, we work with many coffee associations, and we work alongside them to help them promote their brand and image outside of the countries and to connect with this whole specialty or artisan coffee movement.
Hmm.
So we're going there just to learn more about how a coffee producers promoting their coffee. What is the industry looking like over there? What processing methods are they doing? And then also we work with a company called Beemore who makes home coffee roasters and
Okay.
brewing equipment. And every year he does a Christmas party for the children of a coffee cooperative in Antigua. And we go along to help him organize it. And it's very nice. It's basically having healthcare checkups for the kids. And we come along and just basically brew coffee and have a chat with everyone there. So I just love going to learn about what's happening at the production level.
That's fascinating, and that's a what a great experience you get to have. You do a lot of traveling, don't you?
Yeah, it's about 10 months or so a year. It's insane actually at the moment. So I just got back from 6 or 7 weeks in Brazil.
Hmm.
Before that, I was in Guatemala for 10 weeks. And then before that, I was in El Salvador and Honduras, just
Yeah.
all over Latin America mainly, but then sometimes to Asia and, of course, Europe.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so let me get into the questions personally here. How did you first get into coffee? Take us back to that day that what's the story that brought you into coffee?
So for me, I don't come from a family that knows very much about coffee or has an interest as such. But I remember, so after I finished school or high school, as they call it in the States, I went to Ecuador for a sabbatical year, and I was there
Mhm.
for around 6 months. And I developed a curiosity about coffee. Like I started drinking higher quality coffee and beginning to appreciate that coffee was more than just a caffeinated beverage.
Mhm.
And then I kind of maintained this interest throughout my time at university and began like trying to purchase better and better coffee. And then after I graduated, I decided that I wanted to learn a lot more and wanted to do something challenging before I started a job in the real world as such,
Yeah.
because I had a job scheduled to start in London. So I got a flight to Costa Rica and spent 4 months traveling up all the way up to Guatemala, basically tasting coffee and learning about it. And I remember specifically, I went to a farm in a town called Marcala in Honduras and connected with a producer. His name was Omar, and his farm was called Cual Bicicleta. And he started telling me his story about how he worked in coffee and why,
Yeah.
and everything that came into it. So he began telling me that at the age of about 8, he left his parents and basically moved out of his home and had to start living on his own and then moving back and forth with his family, and had a very difficult time with drinking later on in his life. And then he decided to try out coffee farming, and he struggled a lot with commercial farming, didn't really get anywhere, and then connected with a local cooperative who's called Comsa,
Okay.
and they kind of invited him to learn more about organic methods. And they said to him, well, why don't you, rather than just grow coffee like everyone else does, what do you think you can do? How can you differentiate your product? How can you produce a high quality cup of coffee? And he began experimenting. And I remember going to his farm, and he started saying all these wild things. So, for example, he was telling me how the soil was really dry during the dry season. A lot of the plants died. So he
Hmm.
told me that one way to combat this, he worked out that the husks of coconut absorb water. So,
Well,
so he went to the local
that's
lake
cool.
where everyone goes for the summer to like chill out,
Yeah.
and collected all the rubbish, went through the rubbish, got around 2 or 3 thousand coconut husks, and then went around his farm and planted and basically buried them. And then during the dry season, when everyone else's plants were dying, his didn't. And he did tons of things like this. And he wasn't a particularly academic person in terms of education or and I remember saying to him, like, I was like, so how do you tell people about this? How do they know? Like, I'm sure the buyers would like to know this. And he was like, well, when they come, I show it to them. And I was like, well, how many people have come? He was like, I don't know. We had like 5 or 6 people this year. and then I went back to England months later and started speaking to the cafes and asking them how and why they chose to buy the coffees they did. And I remember realizing there was a big disconnect between what people wanted to know and what they were aware of, and then the producer's story. So the producer had an interesting story that added value to the final product, but the consumer or the roaster wasn't aware of it. There wasn't that connection. So I sort of identified, well, maybe I can just start writing about it
Mm-hmm.
and make that connection
Mm-hmm.
just personally, because it was interesting to me. And then it grew and it grew.
That's fascinating. Now, tell us how did that morph into Perfect Daily Grind? What's the birth of Perfect Daily Grind?
So the birth is, I started it towards the end of, so when I was traveling around Central America, I just started doing the odd blog post, writing about specialty coffee, and highly unqualified as such, just basically writing whatever came to mind.
Mm-hmm.
And gradually it became more and more popular. And then after I finished this time in Central America, I went and started a job in London and worked there for around 8 months and kept the website going in the evening. So I would try and schedule, I don't know, 5 or 6 articles a week while I had a full-time job. And I did that for around a year. And then all of a sudden I decided that I couldn't really bear to continue working in a job that I didn't enjoy. And
Right.
kind of the fear of failure was much kind of less than the fear of regret, because I was really worried that I was going to look at myself in a few years' time and be like, why am I working in this corporate job when I don't enjoy it?
Right.
Which I'm sure a lot of people in coffee can kind of.
That's yeah.
And then basically, and then over the past 2 years, just hiring people that are much more intelligent than me.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it's really grown, because I've got people that are much smarter than me at doing things such as writing articles, such as editing, running social media, translating, and I'm just kind of trying to manage everything in between.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Perfect Daily Grind has grown since its beginning, and you have yeah, those of you watching live on Instagram and those of you who are watching on the YouTube recording of this, um, Perfect Daily Grind is, I would guess if it's not the top, in my opinion, the top source of coffee information, it is way up there. There's very few platforms that provide so much helpful information and relevant information as Perfect Daily Grind. So, you go to the website, there's the specialty coffee industry, there's industry tips, brew methods, everything's in Spanish. You got videos and even a coffee events calendar if you're looking for what's coming up. So there's a ton of stuff on here. What do you love the most about what you're doing at Perfect Daily Grind?
So the best part is just connecting with people and meeting people from across the world. So even, for example, the Perfect Daily Grind team, it's really lovely that we get to connect every day with people in different parts of the world. So I just received a message from one of my colleagues, Anna, who's based in Mexico, who's working at the moment. And it's
Okay.
nice to be able to work with people across the world.
Mm-hmm.
And now one of my other colleagues just messaged me, who's based in Spain, and have people in the UK, have people in Colombia, in Brazil, and then also people based in El Salvador. And it's really lovely to be able to connect. And it's also, the thing that I like the most is, with the specialty coffee industry currently, there's so much that's changing.
Mm-hmm.
And at a young age, you can relatively be an expert or be knowledgeable,
Right.
and you can actually contribute something of value. Because in previous jobs, I didn't really feel like what I was doing had value, both in a sentimental sense, but also in terms of giving something back that I could be proud of.
Yeah.
I think that's the most thing, is that you contribute something and you see an area where you think, I can add value to that. Just like yourself with Coffeeprops, it's grown insanely fast.
Right. Right. Yeah. Let me get on to some of the locations that you're on here. I'm sharing those with the group here now. Perfect Daily Grind is both in all English, and then there's also Spanish. And you are also on Pinterest, and you're everywhere.
Yes.
Pinterest,
Yes. Yeah.
a bunch of boards on Pinterest. So, example: flat light, a flat white, AeroPress, latte art, Kalita. I mean, everything is here on Pinterest. You're on Instagram or Twitter. log in here so we can get on here. So there's a shot of you. Let me move you out of the way. There's a shot of you in, where is this? You remember Dominica?
Yes, this is the Republic. This is the Dominican Republic. So that article was actually contributed by someone who lives over in the Dominican Republic and is setting up a micro roastery.
Okay, all right. So there's a Twitter, and you're also on Facebook. So
Yep.
and there's a companion article there. Let me move you out of the way. Companion article to that in Dominican Republic. What does it mean to be a roaster and producing country? And then, of course, you're on Instagram, which is where I think I came in touch with you a while back and learned what you do. And you're also on Instagram in Spanish.
And we also have a video channel now. I don't know if you've seen PDG Video.
Oh, okay. On is that
Instagram?
Oh, on Instagram. Okay. So PDG
Video.
Video? Absolutely. PDG Video. Go there.
So we started that around 3 months ago, and one of my colleagues based in Colombia is running that because we travel a lot around the world. So it's basically about taking videos of maybe a few minutes of each day and sharing that. So most recently, this is from Brazil, but if you go further down, you can see other regions.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. So you're all over the world. Perfect Daily Grind is a world thing. Let's talk about Henry for a second. What's Henry's favorite drink of coffee?
It's really difficult to define a favorite or even to specify. My favorite brewing method is V60. I like, and the reason why I like it is because of I like to have a bright coffee, and I like to have a certain degree of acidity in there, and I'm more drawn towards the lighter roasts, of course. But with reference to coffee, I mean, it all depends on how I'm feeling. I suppose the coffee that I first had that challenged my perception of how coffee can be was in Ecuador when I had a kind of citrusy caramel espresso. But then when I started drinking coffee from East Africa, places like Ethiopia or from Kenya, then it was a lot easier for me to begin to appreciate the nuances of the flavor of coffee, because you begin to realize blackberry, you taste blueberries.
Yeah.
But it's a challenge. I mean, I don't necessarily have a favorite. We're pretty lucky as well because we often get given a lot of coffee. So we just drink whatever people send us, whatever we're tasting at the time.
Sure. Okay. What is the most surprising thing when you leave England and you go to a coffee farm? What are some of the things that stand out to you as far as what goes on in the farms? And just to let you know, I'm asking Henry questions that I didn't plan on asking him. So if he's trying to think through, that's because I'm throwing these at him live without the opportunity to think about them. But what's the thing that impresses you or stands out when you go to a coffee farm?
I'm trying to answer without having any sort of cliches and saying things that we often hear.
Yeah.
So yesterday we had a meeting with a team. We went over some perceptions of producing countries, and we were talking about various ideas. And something that often surprises me is there is a mismatch between how producing countries are often presented and how they really are. So when you go, I think a lot of people expect to be seeing someone in an environment maybe characterized by poverty or people struggling or not really enjoying their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And I think often actually when you go to the coffee farm, you see things that you never even imagined, and people might not be as academically qualified as in other places in the world in some coffee producing regions.
Right.
But when you go there, you begin to realize that people have such expertise in things that you never imagined. So like I was mentioning with this producer, Oscar. So that's something that always that always kind of makes me think, because there's a certain way which the image of producing country is presented to us, okay, or which sometimes isn't always accurate. And
Yeah.
I think that's one of the challenges as well as a publication, or same with yourself, is how do we make that information interesting and accessible?
Right. Right.
Because a lot of the time, I think the way people kind of expect to go to Origin and to have a certain experience based upon what we're sold in the news. But actually, I mean, you hang out with the producers, and often they're studying at agronomy school. They don't necessarily come from a campesino background as you would expect.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I also really like looking at myself is so recently I've been looking at a few things. So the processing methods and understanding the details behind why does this producer do honey as opposed to natural? How does it work? How does he control cup quality? How long is he drying the coffee for? How often does he rotate it?
Yeah.
What African beds does he use? Is the African bed facing the wind? At what angle? And stuff like that's interesting.
Yes. Yes. And helpful. Very helpful.
Yeah, and then more recently as well, we've been looking at how can farmers diversify their crops to produce not only coffee but how to manage that risk. So things. So it's been interesting to look at honey, to look at cacao, to look at ecotourism, because there's all these things happening at the same time. Because when you go to a coffee farm, you realize that it is about coffee, but that's just a part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let me, do you mind taking a question from someone on live on Instagram right now?
No, sure, yeah.
Let's see what happens. Lord Fjord, yeah, you've been jumping up and down, saying, "Come on, let me ask a question." Go ahead and ask your question. So we'll wait for him or her to put that question up. And what's the single, if you could change anything in the coffee industry and make it better, only one thing with your life, what would that be?
To improve the equity of resources along the supply chain
Okay.
is the simplest way of defining it. So, well, it's yeah. So it's essentially that make sure that everyone is is socioeconomically sustainable. So not only is it sustainable for the people that are drinking coffee, for it to be affordable, and the roasters to run a business, but also for the producers to be able to have a greater quality of life and to have the opportunity to try other things.
Okay. And how do you go about doing that? Is it a matter of better information to the coffee drinkers?
Well, there's many different aspects to it. Like when we think about it and we focus on what we're doing, for us, it's education. Because firstly, the reason why we did PDG or Perfect Daily Grind in Spanish is because
Hmm.
the producers firstly have to understand the industry, what the industry is after, and also begin to understand the value of their product and the potential value. Because obviously, there's a big difference from exporting unprocessed coffee to more processed, and as you move along the supply chain, you can
Hmm.
get greater and greater income. And then at the same time, at the consumption level, for example, in the UK or in the States, people still don't really understand what they're paying more money for. We have the niche of specialty coffee lovers like ourselves that people appreciate it. But if you actually analyze it, break down and say, okay, so this coffee is more than this. Why? Beyond saying it, the quality or it tastes nicer, which is subjective,
Right.
people don't always know. I mean, if you have a discussion about what sustainability is, even with a group of highly qualified professionals, they'll give you a different answer.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for us, or for me, it's about challenging the inequities along the supply chain by giving people the information to make a qualified decision. So not about necessarily just saying, okay, I think this is the best thing for you to do. You should grow this crop, but maybe read about this and see what you think.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Great. And so Lord Fjord's not giving me a question, but I did have another one so from Left Coast, Terry, she's saying Canada is reporting that 3 cups a day um, is good for you. Um, what are some good quality coffees? That question is, what coffee is good? Um, does that not matter more about what your preference is? I mean, some people like the real dark, using the words of most consumers, the dark versus light. Um, what makes a coffee good?
Well, I think firstly, it's what you enjoy. First is the starting point. So no one can tell you what's good or what's bad because it's subjective. But
Yeah.
when people ask me or even my family members, because we're faced with a lot of options. You have fair trade, you have Rainforest Alliance, you have supermarkets own brand, you have micro roasters, you have national roasters, you have producers exporting roasted coffee. There's a lot of options. And I think the best thing that you can do is look for traceability. So the more traceability you have, the more accountability there is. So it's
Hmm.
better to have a coffee that says maybe the region's name instead of just the country. And better than the region, it's nicer to have the town.
Okay.
Better than the town, it's nicer to have the farmer's name.
Yeah.
Because the more we can follow that supply chain, the more we can be sure that the people along there are being paid fairly, or at least can try to regulate it a bit more.
Right. Right. Okay. So it's not so much what, if I'm looking at 3 cups of coffee on the table, which one is better? It's more about how that coffee came to be in that cup. It's more the journey as it was the actual taste.
Yeah, I mean, the most important thing is the taste. You have to enjoy what you're drinking. But if you
Right.
enjoy several coffees and you think, I don't know which one to get, just choose the one which is the most traceable.
Yeah. Good advice. Good advice. All right. And someone said, excellent. No more Starbucks for me.
Uh-huh.
We won't get into that whole discussion, but
Mm-hmm.
there's a place for everybody in the coffee thing. But the key thing here is the sustainability and things like that, and the equity of how people are treated and paid fairly and all that. Henry, you have been very gracious in allowing me to ask you questions um, that I didn't tell you I was going to ask you. But hopefully, this has been very informative to a lot of people. And main thing I want to do is get the information out there. And you are one of the best, like I said, in getting information to the consumer and to the farmer and to the coffee shop owner, to the barista. There's a lot of information on perfectdailygrind.com. So you want to be looking at them. You want to be following them on Instagram. And we learned today there are 3 Instagram accounts. There's the regular Perfect Daily Grind, Perfect Daily Grind in Spanish, and Perfect Daily Grind Video, PDG Video. So Henry, thank you so much for taking your time. What time is it where you're at?
5 o'clock in the afternoon.
5 in the afternoon. All right. Well, we're at 12 o'clock here at noon, and it's been enjoyable to talk with you.
Well, thanks very much. I really appreciate it. And I think you're doing fantastic work as well. I share the newsletter regularly with the team.
Great. Great. We're doing the best we can to bring the consumer and the farmer together and everybody in between. So
And the newsletter is every Wednesday, your newsletter, or is it every Tuesday? Is
it's
it
actually every Friday.
every Friday? Okay.
Yep. Sending every Friday. We're getting into a little bit more help, how to take greater photos, how to grow your Instagram, and then also how to brew a great cup of coffee. So we're talking about those things. And of course, I highlight Perfect Daily Grind very frequently in the newsletter. So we have talked with Henry Wilson with Perfect Daily Grind. If you want to be interviewed on Coffeeprops interviews, we would love for you to do that. If you're interested, just send "I want to be interviewed" to info@coffeeprops.com. You are going to see this video on our YouTube, what is it called? A playlist of all the interviews. We've done about 26 interviews so far. And this is going to be one of the better ones. I'm trying to do more and more and get more information out there. So, all right. Well, thank you, Henry. We'll keep in touch with you.
Well, thanks very much, Scott.
Okay. And
Bye-bye.
thanks for joining us on live Instagram, all of you. And we'll talk to you later.
Thank you.
Okay.